John, the last sound we've heard is that long drone on F that goes all the way through the opera. It's the first sound we hear, and it's the last sound we hear. Can you explain the use of that drone and why it's so persistent throughout the opera?
It's a kind of eternity note, reminding us that whatever is happening in the piece, the divine presence is always there. It's a device used in Indian music, it's a device used in Byzantine music. It's called the eson in Byzantine music. And quite dramatically at certain points, it sometimes isn't there. And that's to illustrate a point in either Mary's journey or Zosima's journey, and then the F comes off. Not because divine presence is not there, but because they can't hear or see or sense it or feel it.
Mary of Egypt was promoted as an opera, but I know that you feel strongly that it is not an opera, but a moving or living icon. How should the listener approach this?
I think by calling it an icon, I direct the listener in a certain way of listening, of watching. Mary of Egypt's highly stylized, both to look at and to listen to. I use very simple primary colours, as the icon painter does. It's essentially a contemplative piece. I also use geometric symbolism, and, for instance, the flute, which in the Middle East represents the instrument of love, always accompanies Mary, the feminine, and the trombone, representing the masculine, always accompanies Zosima, the holy man.
And structurally too, it's very simple, isn't it?
Structurally it's very simple, and it makes use of tones used in Byzantium and probably in Indian music also. And in that sense, I try to make it as timeless as possible, as unconnected with any century, because icons, if they're painted today, or if they were painted in the 16th century or the 5th century, have changed very little. And if we hadn't had a Renaissance in the West, maybe music would have gone in a different direction anyway.
It's that timeless, almost transcendental quality. Reminded me at times of Sufi music. And I know you've spoken about the theology of the Desert Fathers. Is there any connection there?
Well, I think the Sufis and the Desert Fathers were existing at the same time, and they probably came across each other in the desert. And in a way, Mary of Egypt, well, of course it is a parable of non-judgment, and it has a very desert fathery feel about it, or desert mothery feel about it. And it also could be a Sufi tale as well. I can give two examples. One, a Sufi tale about a monk and his young postulant, and they're walking in the desert, and the old monk sees a young girl naked drowning in the water, and he runs over and clasps her in his arms and takes her out, and then deposits her on the dry land, and they go on walking, the old monk and the young one. And after about 10 hours, the young monk turns to the old monk and said, "You filthy, disgusting man, you handled a young girl's flesh." And the old monk says, "Oh, well, you're still thinking about that young girl. I forgot about her 10 hours ago." And a similar story of desert fathers, which I like to tell myself as much as possible, because I find it helps me a lot. Again, a young monk and an old abbot. The young monk says to the old abbot, "I can't bear all this praise. I can't bear all the insults that people hurl at me." And the old abbot says, "Well, go into the graveyard and shout abuse at the dead and see what happens." So the young monk goes in and does that. And then the abbot says to the young monk, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "That's how you should react to abuse and to praise. You shouldn't react at all."
Mother Thecla, the librettist of Mary of Egypt, has described an icon as austerely stylized, kept at a distance from author and reader. Are the audience of Mary of Egypt kept at a distance?
Well, in one way they are, and in one way they're not. They're not brought in straight away in the way that they would be with, in an opera like Turandot or The Marriage of Figaro. They're brought in gradually. They are brought in dramatically, but at the same time, and this is where you get the double movement, we're constantly reminded that we all have this enormous human distance from divine judgment. So in a sense, they are brought in dramatically, but they are also kept at a distance.
You have said before that for yourself, music in today's society doesn't seem to have any function anymore. What function do you feel Mary of Egypt fulfills?
I've tried in Mary of Egypt and in many recent works to somehow restore the aesthetic and the theological so that they're not any longer separate or indeed in opposition, but one.
I believe Mary of Egypt first became an idea about 10 years ago. Why such a long gestation period?
I simply couldn't find the right librettist. I don't think many people wanted to touch a subject which dealt with sexuality, prostitution that is, and spirituality. They found the subject difficult. I wanted basically a very, very simple libretto, rather like Egyptian or Coptic icons, almost childlike simplicity. And I found in Mother Thecla just the right balance. She wrote quite a long libretto to begin with, which I rejected. And I think the fact that she's a nun was very helpful because she doesn't care like an ordinary writer would care about her words being changed, distorted, etc., etc. It's a very simple libretto with words repeated often many times. And I think she rewrote it about 5 or 6 times. And when she sent the 6th version to me, she said, "This is the last version. I'm not doing any more. I hate you."
Immediately after Mary's burial, there's an almost joyous passage called Love's Whirligig. Can you explain?
It's a kind of joyous celebration. All the people who've taken part in Mary of Egypt, the swine women, the swine men, the angels, they all take part in this celebration of non-judgment, because we don't know what's whoredom, what's prudery, what's anything, because all within the whirligig of divine love, all must be harmony.
In today's society, there are a lot of religions that are judgmental, are very bound up in dogma and intolerance. And for those, one would feel that they don't have a lot of, or wouldn't have a lot of sympathy for a subject like Mary of Egypt. In that sense, Mary of Egypt challenges those religions.
I don't think Mary of Egypt herself, in a sense, does. I think Orthodoxy does, because a lot of the religions which you refer to are Western forms of Christianity, which are very much based on Aristotelian modes of thinking rather than Platonic ones, which I think the Orthodox Church based itself much more on. We don't have dogmas in the sense that the Western Church have dogmas. And I think it's true to say not all branches of the Orthodox Church, but I think at its best, we also realize the limitation of the human mind. We also realize that in the incarnation of the Logos in Christ, he turned everything upside down. All our human values are turned completely upside down if you read the Gospels. Therefore, it's not possible to make dogmatic judgments about anything. And the only judgment that counts in the end is the one we don't know anything about, which is the divine judgment.
A lot of the music in Mary of Egypt, like much of your other music, relies on the use of Byzantine chant. And I believe in one chant in particular in this work. What chant is that, and what is its function?
The chant is, in Greek, tinoriotata, which means awed by thy beauty, and it is sung to the Mother of God. I thought it appropriate because I liked it musically, and I wanted to use it musically. Also, I thought the words were appropriate because, in a sense, it's the whole of Mary of Egypt is about various kinds of beauty, not in the sentimental sense, but one can think of the beauty or radiance of Mary that she must have had as a whore in Alexandria, and the fact that she wouldn't take money for her prostitution. And one's reminded then of the Gospels. At least she had love. And the beauty of the holy man, the beauty of his asceticism, even though he hadn't discovered the feminine or love in himself. And then there's the beauty of their meeting, where he does discover this beauty in Mary. Although by this time Mary, of course, is a very old woman with hardly any clothes, scorched by the summer sun, and he's a very old man. So there's that beauty. And then behind all of this is the inexplicable, unknowable, awesome beauty of God.